By 9:35 a.m. on December 15, 1966, the world had lost one of its most transformative visionaries. Walt Disney, the man who turned a mouse into a global empire, was gone. His death would send shockwaves through an industry he had single-handedly revolutionized. But 24 hours earlier, none of this felt inevitable. The previous morning began like any other at St. Joseph Hospital in Burbank, California. Room 3H was quiet. The curtains were partially drawn. Medical staff moved in controlled patterns. Walt Disney, 65 years old, lay in bed surrounded by the sterile white walls that had become his world for the past month. He had built castles. He had created entire universes. Now he occupied a single room. Outside, the Disney empire continued its relentless momentum. Disneyland welcomed families. Animators refined scenes. Executives planned expansions. The company bore his name, but it no longer required his constant presence to function. He had ensured that. Yet on this particular morning, December 14th, something was different. The energy that had driven him for decades, that had pushed him through bankruptcy, war, and countless failures, was fading. By the end of this day, a chapter of history would close. But in these final 24 hours, Walt Disney's mind was not on endings. It was still on tomorrow, on Florida, on Epcot, on futures he would never see. This is the reconstruction of those hours. The last day before everything changed, Walt Disney was not just a name. By December 1966, it was an institution. The man had transformed American entertainment. From a small animation studio in the 1920s, he had built an empire that included films, television, theme parks, and cultural influence that reached every corner of the globe. Mickey Mouse was more recognizable than most world leaders. Disneyland had redefined family entertainment. Snow White, Cinderella, and dozens of other characters lived in the collective consciousness of millions. But the public knew very little about what was happening inside St. Joseph Hospital. On November 2, 1966, Walt had undergone surgery. Doctors removed a tumor from his left lung. The official statement was vague. The Disney company downplayed concerns. Privately, the prognosis was far more serious. The cancer had spread. Treatment options were limited. Walt knew this. His family knew this. The executives at Disney knew this. The world did not. At this moment in history, Walt Disney represented something larger than himself. He was the dreamer who proved dreams could become reality. He was the stubborn innovator who refused to accept limitations. He was building something in Florida that would dwarf even Disneyland, the Florida Project, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow, Epcot. These were not just theme parks. In Walt's vision, they were the future of urban living, but vision requires time, and time, for Walt Disney, was running out faster than anyone outside that hospital room understood. December 14, 1966, 6 a.m. The morning shift began at St. Joseph Hospital. Nurses checked vital signs. Walt Disney was awake. He had never been a late sleeper. Even here, even now, old habits persisted. His condition had stabilized somewhat over the past week. Not improved. Stabilized. There is a difference. The surgical wound from November had healed on the surface. Internally, the battle was already lost. But Walt's mind remained sharp. Frustratingly sharp for a body that could no longer keep pace. His daughter Diane visited early. She brought news from the studio. Updates on projects, small details about grandchildren, normal conversation, the kind that pretends everything will continue as it always has. Walt listened. He asked questions. His voice was weaker than it had been a month ago, but the curiosity remained intact. By 8 a.m., breakfast arrived. He ate little. Appetite had become unreliable. The medical staff noted this. They noted everything. Charts were updated. Doctors conferred in hallways. At 10 a.m., Roy Disney, Walt's older brother and business partner, arrived. Roy had been the financial backbone of the Disney empire while Walt provided the creative vision. Their relationship had survived decades of tension, disagreement, and mutual dependence. They spoke about Florida. Always Florida. The land purchases were complete. Plans were progressing. Construction timelines were being finalized. Walt's interest in these details had not diminished. If anything, they had intensified. He could not be there physically, but mentally he was still building. 12 p.m. Afternoon settled over the hospital. The room remained quiet. Walt rested between conversations. Sleep came in fragments now, never deep, never restorative. Medical assessments continued throughout the day. Blood pressure, temperature, respiration rate. The numbers told a story the patient already knew. At 2 p.m., studio executives arrived with documents. Even from a hospital bed, certain decisions required Walt's input. He reviewed plans for upcoming film releases. He asked about the progress on the Jungle Book, still in production. Details mattered to him. They always had. The executives kept the meeting brief. They could see the effort each sentence required. By 3:30 p.m., the visitors had left. Walt was alone again with his thoughts. A nurse brought medication. He took it without complaint. Outside the window, Los Angeles continued its ordinary rhythm. Traffic moved, people worked, lives progressed without pause. Inside room 3H, time felt different, slower, heavier. At 4 p.m., his wife Lillian arrived. They had been married for 41 years. She had been there at the beginning when Disney was just a struggling animator with more ambition than money. She sat beside the bed. They did not need to fill the silence with words. Some conversations happen without speaking. By 5 p.m., the light outside began to fade. Winter days are short. Darkness comes early. Walt watched the shadows lengthen across the hospital walls. He had built an empire on light and color and imagination. Now he was surrounded by white walls and medical equipment and the slow erosion of time. 6 p.m. Evening arrived. The hospital shifted into night mode. Lights dimmed in hallways. Visitor hours were ending. Lillian remained. Family was always permitted to stay. Walt's condition began to change. Subtle at first, his breathing became more labored. The medical staff noticed immediately. Monitoring increased. A doctor was consulted. At 7:30 p.m., additional family members were called. Not an emergency, not yet. But the trajectory was clear. Roy returned. Diane came back with her husband. The room that had been quiet all day now held multiple voices, hushed but present. Walt drifted in and out of awareness. When conscious, he still asked about Florida, about Epcot, about the future he had spent the last years planning. In his mind, construction timelines still mattered. By 9 p.m., the point of no return had arrived. Medical intervention could delay but not prevent what was coming. The doctors explained this to the family. Decisions were made about comfort rather than prolonging. Walt had made his wishes clear weeks ago. No extraordinary measures. He had never been afraid of endings, only of leaving work unfinished. At 10:30 p.m., he spoke his last coherent words. They were not poetic. They were not profound. They were about the Florida project, about maps, about plans. Even at the edge of consciousness, his mind was still building tomorrow. Lillian held his hand. The room was warm. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Outside, the world continued, unaware that one of its greatest dreamers was slipping away. Midnight passed. December 15th, 1966 had begun. Walt Disney's breathing grew shallower. The family remained present. Nurses checked monitors. Hours moved slowly. By 3 a.m. he had lost consciousness completely. His body continued its biological functions, but the mind that had revolutionized entertainment was no longer engaged with the world around it. At 6 a.m., the sun began to rise over Burbank. Morning light touched the hospital windows. Inside room 3H, the light made no difference. At 9:30 a.m., cardiac arrest began. Medical staff responded immediately. But the outcome had been determined long before this moment. At 9:35 a.m., Walter Elias Disney was pronounced dead. Acute circulatory collapse was listed as the immediate cause. The underlying cause was lung cancer that had metastasized throughout his body. He was 65 years old. The news was released within hours. Radio stations interrupted programming. Television networks prepared special reports. Newspapers rewrote front pages. The world reacted with genuine shock. Many had not known he was seriously ill. By evening, tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. Presidents, artists, ordinary families who had grown up with his creations, all recognized that something irreplaceable had been lost. Walt Disney's funeral was private. His family honored his wish for simplicity. He was cremated. No public memorial. No state ceremony. The man who had created spectacle for millions chose quiet for himself. But the empire continued. Roy Disney postponed his retirement to oversee the Florida project. It would open in 1971 as Walt Disney World. This was DAYFALLING. One day, everything changes.